They thought she was just a forgotten ex. They were wrong. The first whisper came before she even sat down. "Is that Emily? Alone?" She actually came? That's kind of sad. Emily Blake smoothed the folds of her simple black dress as she slid into the last row of pews in the church. Her hands were still shaking from the drive, and her heart thudded like a war drum in her chest. 7 years. That's how long she had been with Jason Langston. 7 years of memories now reduced to this moment, watching him marry someone else. She didn't come to win him back. She wasn't here to make a scene. In fact, if anyone asked, she would have preferred to be invisible. But there was one problem: people remembered her. Just enough to judge her, but not enough to understand. Her sister, Madeline, had begged her not to come. "Emily, it'll be humiliating. You'll be alone, and everyone will talk." She wasn't wrong. That morning, Emily stood in front of her closet, staring at the black dress. It was safe. It was unassuming. It screamed, "Don't look at me." That's what she wanted. Or at least, that's what she thought. She hadn't told Anya or her sister, not her parents, not a single soul, that 6 months ago she had quietly married a man named Julian Carter. No big wedding, no elaborate announcement. Just 2 witnesses, a county clerk, and a whispered promise to protect each other from the noise. Because Emily knew noise. Her family specialized in opinions dressed as concern, judgment disguised as love. She kept Julian to herself because he was different, kind, thoughtful, unbothered by appearances. Everything her family would question just because they couldn't control it. And so she came alone. As the organ music began and Jason's bride appeared in radiant white, Emily inhaled sharply, steadying herself. The air in the church felt heavier now, like the room had shifted its weight toward her, pressing in with every sideways glance. Mrs. Dempsey, a neighbor who still called her that sweet girl who never quite got over him, leaned in with an all-too-familiar look. "Are you here with someone, dear?" Emily offered a polite smile and shook her head. "Oh, well, you look lovely," Mrs. Dempsey said, in the tone one uses for a sympathy card. The ceremony began. Jason looked handsome, in the way memory tends to soften edges. He adjusted his cufflinks nervously as his bride, Chelsea, approached. She looked at him the way Emily once had, with trust, with hope, with a kind of innocent certainty that only first-time love allows. But Emily, she wasn't that girl anymore. She listened to the vows like someone eavesdropping on a life that could have been hers in another timeline, and still, something in her softened. There was no bitterness, not anymore. Just a quiet ache, and the courage to sit with it. But the whispers didn't stop. At the reception, they got louder. Poor Emily. 33, and still single. She used to be so promising. Even Madeline, never one to waste a cutting remark, slid beside her at the gift table and said, "I don't know what's sadder, that you came, or that you're still pretending you're okay." Emily didn't respond. She didn't have to, because she hadn't come for them. She came for her. Still, when the bouquet toss began, someone pushed her forward. She stumbled into the circle of single women, as if auditioning for another round of public pity. The bouquet soared, arched, and of course landed in her arms. There was laughter, some genuine, most cruel. "Well, maybe it's finally your turn," someone said with a smirk. Emily smiled tightly, trying not to tremble. And then someone shouted, "Speech!" She froze. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't her stage. She wasn't here to be seen. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. Madeline whispered harshly, "Say something, don't just stand there." But before Emily could speak, before the floor beneath her disappeared, a noise sliced through the room. A set of heavy doors burst open behind her. Gasps echoed, heads turned, glasses clinked in mid-air. Standing at the entrance, framed by the fading afternoon light, was a man in a charcoal grey suit, calm, tall, completely out of place. Julian. The husband no one knew existed. Julian stepped into the reception hall like he'd been expected, like he belonged. But of course, he hadn't been expected, not by the guests, not by Madeline, and certainly not by Emily. Her breath caught in her throat as he approached, cutting a deliberate path through the stunned crowd. He moved with quiet confidence, not rushing, not hesitating, like a man used to navigating rooms full of opinions and judgment, and not giving them a second thought. He stopped directly in front of her, his eyes steady, voice low but audible. Sorry I'm late, love. Traffic from the airport was brutal. Every conversation froze. Champagne glasses lowered. Someone near the cake table actually dropped a fork. Madeline's eyes narrowed. Love? She repeated, as if the word were foreign on her sister's lips. Who is this? Julian glanced at her briefly, then turned back to Emily with a small smile. Didn't want you to face this alone. Emily felt her heart twist relief, embarrassment, pride, all tangled together. She hadn't asked him to come. She never even told him the exact location, but somehow he had found her. And he had come. Before she could speak, Julian reached for her hand gently, reverently, and then lifted it to kiss the ring that had been hidden beneath her glove the entire night. Gasps rippled across the room like wind through dry leaves. It was subtle, elegant, but to anyone watching, the message was clear. This woman is not alone. This woman is his. Mrs. Dempsey, who had pitied her barely an hour earlier, pressed a hand to her chest in stunned silence. A cousin at the bar leaned forward so sharply he spilled his drink. Even Chelsea's bride looked momentarily thrown, blinking as if trying to place the man who now held the room's attention. Julian's next words were quiet, but they didn't need volume. I told you I wouldn't let you carry old ghosts by yourself. You've done enough of that already. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Calm, sure, without fanfare or flourish. He didn't need to shout to be heard. He didn't need to convince anyone. He already knew the truth. That's when the crowd began to shift. People who had mocked or whispered now stared in confusion. Or awe. Murmurs replaced judgment. Wait, they're married? When did that happen? Who is this guy? Madeline looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. You got married and didn't tell your own family? She hissed. To who? What does he even do? Julian turned to her without a trace of irritation. Julian Carter. I work in conflict negotiation, but more importantly, he looked at Emily. I'm her husband, and I'm very proud to be. The simplicity of the statement held more weight than any performance ever could. It didn't need dramatics, just truth. Emily's voice finally returned to her, soft and steady. I didn't tell anyone because I wasn't ready, and honestly, I didn't think you'd believe me anyway. Madeline scoffed, but the tremor in her lips betrayed her. For years, she had dominated every family gathering with backhanded compliments and strategic comparisons. But now, she was irrelevant, exposed. Jason and Chelsea made their way over slowly. He looked uncomfortable. She looked curious. Emily, Jason said, careful. I didn't know you were... Julian extended his hand before he could finish. Julian Carter, pleasure to meet you. Congratulations to both of you. Jason shook his hand like a man being caught off guard at his own party. Thanks. Same to you, I guess. Chelsea, ever the composed hostess, smiled and said, We had no idea. You both seem wonderful together. But it was what she said next that made Emily blink. It's kind of amazing. You're just standing here with him and it's like the whole room flipped. She was right. The atmosphere had changed, not with drama but with presence. Julian hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't declared war. He had simply existed beside Emily, and in doing so, shifted the balance of the entire evening. There was something about a woman who walked in alone, and left with someone who made no effort to own her, but every effort to honor her. A photographer hovered nearby, unsure whether to capture what was clearly the emotional climax of the evening back away. And through it all, Emily remained calm. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't demanded respect. She had simply shown up, and when her truth arrived beside her, everything else fell into place. The same people who once pitied her now looked at her like a mystery they were desperate to solve. Who is she really? How did she end up with someone like him? Did we misjudge her all this time? And still she said nothing, because she didn't need to. For a few breathless moments, the reception existed in limbo between disbelief and awakening. The energy in the room had shifted, but not everyone was ready to accept the new gravity. Madeline certainly wasn't Prohibition. This is ridiculous, she snapped, the corner of her lip twitching in that familiar way that always preceded one of her concerned interventions. You really expect everyone to believe you got married in secret to a man like him? Emily, this isn't a fairy tale. Julian turned to her, his tone still level but unshakably firm. You're right, it isn't. Because in a fairy tale, people like you would be the villain, and no one would have to sit at dinner with them after. The silence was deafening. Someone at a nearby table actually dropped their fork, and no one moved to pick it up. Madeline flushed, stammering. "I was just saying." "No," Julian cut in gently. "You were assuming, judging, because someone in this room had the audacity to live a life you didn't script for them. Emily doesn't owe you or anyone here an explanation, but since you asked..." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded card, which he handed to the nearest guest, a curious man in a navy tie, who'd been whispering all evening. The guest's eyes widened as he read the logo. Carter vertical bar, Ashton vertical bar, Langford. Strategic Negotiations and Global Conflict Mediation. A beat passed, then another. "Wait, Carter?" someone muttered. A woman across the room gasped, "As in Julian Carter? From the Geneva Accords?" Heads swiveled again, this time with recognition. Another guest pulled out their phone, whispering to someone beside them. He was on the cover of Time last year, helped broker that Middle East tech alliance. And suddenly, just like that, the room knew exactly who he was. Julian Carter wasn't just some supportive husband. He was a world-renowned negotiator, sought after by presidents, CEOs, and even the UN. He was known for his calm, surgical ability to walk into rooms filled with hostility and leave with peace. And he had married Emily Blake, the same Emily who had once been known only as Jason Langston's ex, the one they whispered about at barbecues and weddings, the one they had written off as a sad leftover of someone else's glow. The revelation crashed like a tidal wave, and yet, in the eye of the storm, Emily stood completely still. Someone finally spoke from across the room. It was Mrs. Dempsey again, but this time her voice was different, warmer. "Emily dear, why didn't you ever tell us?" Emily looked at her, and for the first time that evening, she didn't smile politely. She didn't apologize. She answered with truth. "Because I didn't need your permission to be happy." Julian's hand tightened gently around hers. She could feel the pulse of his support running through his fingertips, steady, calm, present. Jason and Chelsea returned, slower this time, more hesitant. Jason looked genuinely uncomfortable now, his voice lower than before. "I just want to say, congratulations. I had no idea." "You didn't need to," Emily replied. "What we had ended for a reason. This is what was waiting for me when I stopped trying to fix the past." Chelsea smiled and said, without jealousy or malice, "He looks at you like he knows the whole story and still chooses you." That was the moment Emily felt it, the release. The old acheth need to be seen, to be validated by the people who once made her feel small was gone. Julian turned to the crowd and, for the first time that night, addressed them directly. "I'm sorry to interrupt your evening," he began, voice clear, poised, and strong. "But I need to say something not for me, but for my wife." The room stilled. Even the servers paused mid-step. For years, Emily was measured against expectations that never fit. She was told she was too quiet, too sensitive, too indecisive. But what I saw when I met her was something none of you ever bothered to look for: depth, intelligence, grace, courage. He looked directly at Madeline. "You call her weak because she doesn't fight like you do, but I've watched her walk into rooms that tried to break her spirit and leave with her dignity intact. That's not weakness. That's restraint. That's strength." There were no retorts now, just stillness. "And if any of you think she married above her station, you're wrong," Julian added. "I married up. The world sees me as someone important, but she's the reason I stay grounded. She's my home." Emily blinked back tears, her throat tight. She hadn't expected a speech. She hadn't expected to be defended. But most of all, she hadn't expected to feel so seen. A slow, quiet applause began. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obligatory. It was reverent, as if everyone in the room finally understood what they had missed for years. Emily Blake was not just someone's ex. She was the woman who had found peace, love, and power without asking for approval first. As the applause faded, Emily looked around the room that had, for so long, been a stage of her humiliation. But tonight it felt different. People were no longer looking at her with pity or amusement. They were looking with something else entirely. Respect. Mrs. Dempsey, the neighbor who had once pit-patted Emily's hand like a lonely pet, approached her with a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "He's lovely, dear," she said. "You make a beautiful couple." For the first time all evening, Emily didn't shrink under the compliment. She smiled not to appease or deflect, but because she genuinely believed it now. "Thank you. We think so too." Julian kissed her temple, his arms snug around her back, like he wasn't just proud of Herbert in awe. A slow, romantic tune began to play, and without asking, Julian took her hand. The dance floor parted around them as if by instinct, forming a quiet halo of space. No one interrupted, no one laughed. And Emily, who had spent so much of her life being small in other people's stories, stood tall in her own. As they swayed, Julian leaned in and whispered, "You were incredible tonight. I've never been prouder." "I didn't do anything dramatic," she said, her voice low. "Exactly," he replied. "You didn't need to." They moved like they'd danced together for decades, fluid, confident, centered in each other. Around them, couples joined the floor, but all eyes remained on them. Even Jason and Chelsea danced past at one point. Jason gave her a small nod. Not regretful, just genuine. "You look happy," he mouthed. And she was. Not performatively, not to prove anything, but quietly, deeply, fully. By the bar, Emily spotted Madeline talking to their mother. The same mother who once said Emily was too emotional, too quiet, too much like her father's side. But now, her mother wasn't criticizing, she was watching, observing, maybe even rethinking. Eventually, they approached. Madeline spoke first. No sarcasm, no sharpness, just a quiet voice filled with something Emily hadn't heard in years. Humility. "I was wrong, Emily," she said. "What I said before about being realistic, I didn't understand you. But seeing you tonight, seeing how he looks at you, I realize I've been trying to fit you into a life that never belonged to you." Emily didn't say anything right away. She didn't need to. Madeline's voice wavered. "You deserve better than what I've been giving you. I'm sorry." And for the first time in over a decade, Emily believed she meant it. Her mother stepped forward, brushing her hand gently down Emily's arm. "You found something real, sweetheart. I wish I'd seen it sooner." Julian gave a polite nod, ever gracious. "We'd love to have you both over for dinner next week," he said. "No expectations, just a fresh start." That offer, simple, generous, and without strings, was everything Emily had always needed. Not validation, not permission, just a space to exist without apology. As the evening came to a close, distant cousins who had once ignored her now asked how she and Julian met. Friends from college reappeared, wanting to reconnect. Even some of Jason's relatives congratulated her, genuinely impressed. But none of it mattered as much as what Julian whispered just before they left. "You know what was the best part of tonight?" Emily shook her head. "Watching you remember who you are, and knowing that next time, you won't hide it from anyone." They walked hand in hand out to the parking lot under a sky full of stars. It was quiet, peaceful. The hum of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind them. As they reached the car, Emily stopped and turned to him. "I'm sorry I kept you hidden for so long." Julian cupped her face with both hands, brushing his thumbs across her cheeks. "You didn't keep me hidden. You were protecting yourself. That's not weakness. That's survival. But you don't have to survive anymore, Em. You can live." She smiled, a little breathless. The weight on her chest finally lifted. "Then let's go live." They drove off not because they were running from the past, but because they were finally free of it. As they disappeared into the dark, something became clear not just to the crowd left behind, but to Emily herself. The most powerful people in the room aren't always the ones who speak the loudest. Sometimes, they're the ones who walk in alone and still command the air. Sometimes, they don't demand attention, because their truth demands it for them. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is living a life you don't have to explain.